Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica, and unfortunately Nintendo has found that DMCA ban hammer again. We've been doing a whole series on their legal shenanigans, and this time they've gone after Sudachi, another Nintendo Switch emulator. And while this comes as no surprise, Nintendo's been basically suing or DMCAing anyone they can find these days. It is still something that is very topical that we're going to break down and talk about in the video, because this is another interesting case, and it's a situation in which people from Sudachi say they are going to fight back, so that'll be very interesting to see. But just like we talked about before, Nintendo's been going down the line, DMCAing basically anything they don't like. They had the lawsuit with Yuzu, they had the DMCA takedown request with Suyu. They've basically gone after absolutely anything they can get a hold of and either sued the makers or had them take it down with a DMCA request. And in some instances they seem to abuse the DMCA request, and in some instances it seems like it's a perfectly legal, permissible thing for them to do, and it makes sense. The first half of this video is going to be the news and what's going on, and the back half is going to be a concrete legal analysis of exactly what Nintendo's trying to do. So if you like that, stay tuned. But you'll see here one of the developers from Sudachi says that the repo was DMCA'd and that they will be countering, and that they're trying to get the full DMCA takedown request. This is interesting that one of the makers is going to counter it because in their opinion they don't think they are doing anything wrong. And the fun part about opinions is they can be researched, looked into, and decided whether or not that would be something that would make sense to do. But as of the recording of this video, if you go to the Sudachi GitHub page, it just is not there. Now GitHub is not your friend, they're not your enemy, they're just trying to make sure that they make an easy time for themselves, so when they receive these requests, especially from legal counsel from Nintendo, they're really not going to wait around, they are going to remove that. And this seems to be the game plan for Nintendo. They either start with a lawsuit if they feel like it's a slam dunk, or they go to the DMCA if it doesn't seem like it is an open and shut case. For Yuzu, that was definitely the lawsuit direction, and it was an open and shut case. They got a settlement for $2.4 billion, but again, remember, settlements are not precedent, they are just deals done before the court case sees a conclusion. So this is multiple Switch emulators that have ceased development and either settled a lawsuit or basically just packed up their toys and gone home. That doesn't mean that Nintendo Switch emulation is dead, it just means that Nintendo's going down the line, trying to pick these things off, and Sudachi is the next target of their legal team. I'm sure that more will pop up and more will be discussed in the future, but that's what we have today as far as what is actually going on. And that is just the thing. Nintendo is going to continually use the DMCA takedown to remove anything they don't online. Stuff like Heaven Studio for Rhythm Heaven was removed, and they've even gone so far as to remove sheet music online, so you can sit down at a piano and play Nintendo music. So they will use the DMCA takedown request for absolutely anything they want. When it doesn't make sense to sue somebody in the instance of Heaven Studio or sheet music, a lawsuit would probably be too heavy-handed even for Nintendo. And the developers are talking about getting updates here, and the reference to provision 1201 in the DMCA. Now we need to talk about the DMCA policies in and of themselves. It stands for Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and one word in that is very important: the word millennium. This is not a recent law. It was written in a time and place where it talks more about DVDs as a concept than it does a high-end emulator that does something like Nintendo Switch. So the laws on the books in and of themselves for these things can be slightly antiquated, and you will see here that the lawsuit for a lot of these things, including Yuzu, revolves around the DMCA provision 1201 subsection A1, which talks about circumvention. And this is where it gets really tricky, and we kind of have to break down exactly what the laws mean. But as of the recording of this voiceover, and I'm doing this about 6 hours before you're going to be watching it, the Sudachi website is still up, and you can still download the emulator from the site in and of itself. So that is definitely a positive thing. We'll have to wait and see if Nintendo goes after the web host or anyone else involved in this in any other legal manner. But if you want to grab Sudachi today, I definitely recommend you give it a go. You can grab it for Android and Windows right now. But there is particularly something, if Sudachi is going to counter Nintendo on that DMCA takedown request, that they should absolutely deal with, as the recording of this video. They talk about the prod keys and the title keys, and that's totally fine to talk about it, but then you get to a section in their website with this little download button right here, and while the link might be broken, it is stating in plain language that they're offering it to you to be able to obtain. I was very surprised to find this, and I can't recommend enough. If you're listening, Sudachi, you probably should take care of that about 8 hours ago. You should have never put it up in the first place, if we're being honest. Moving over to 1201 on the DMCA, subsection 1A, you're going to see here it says no person shall circumvent a technological measure that effectively controls access to a work protected under this title. And now if you just take this one sentence here, it seems like reverse engineering the security on the Switch would not be allowed. But there are so many different exemptions to this provision that make it permissible, and that is the really strange thing about the DMCA and what Nintendo's using in general. It seems to both answer in the affirmative and the negative as to whether or not any sort of function like this is permitted. And when they talk about circumventing a technological measure, it just means bypassing whatever key system or copyright protection would be in there. And that is the big question on the board, and one that's never been decided. Is this allowed to be done? Because on the Nintendo Switch, as I've explained before, you have the decryption key, which is going to be sitting on your Nintendo Switch, and you should be able to legally dump that from your console and be totally fine. You did purchase it. And then of course you have the games with the software key. These are unique to each individual cartridge put out there, so if you purchase the game, you are permitted to make a legal backup of that. If you put both keys together, you can use it to run games. This is basically the technological measure that makes sure the games are authorized to run, and then that's when we talk about the circumvention of that copyright protection system or anything else within that umbrella. And this is basically where the law does not have a great answer. I would love to be definitive on this, but there's so many different legal minds that have talked about this, and they never seem to come up to a concrete conclusion. The EFF even has an entire page about reverse engineering, the DMCA, and other technological prevention measurements that can be employed and how to work within the guides of the law, and they basically say at every different turn you should consult a lawyer. And that's the thing about the legal profession in and of itself. The lawyers for Nintendo are going to argue Nintendo's case. If you get a lawyer and go after Nintendo, they're going to argue your case. They're going to be using the same language in these same laws, and they're going to be interpreting them in two different manners, one for the prosecution and one for the defense. It then comes down to a judge or a jury to decide which one is right. This happens all the time. Language needs to be parsed and understood, because again, the DMCA talks more about DVDs and digital video downloads than anything, and that is because it uses the language of the law when it was written at the turn of the millennium. It does not really have great language to talk about decryption keys and software keys, so it is open to interpretation, and until we see a legal case go to an actual decision, we will not 100% know whether or not trying to reverse engineer the protection on the Nintendo Switch would be a legally permitted activity, or else it would be illegal, and that is the gray area that everything operates in right now. Subsection 1201 is what Nintendo loves to cite in every single one of their cases on the DMCA side as well as lawsuit side, so they seem to think that it might be a winner. And there's a ton of different exemptions to this, and any of these exemptions could be argued as to be allowed in Nintendo to not have a case, but other exemptions could be argued to say Nintendo can prove themselves right in court. So really it is just basically a junk ball here. You've lawfully obtained the right to use a computer program. If you bought the Switch games, that means you've satisfied that. If you're researching it just to achieve interoperability with the emulator, that is fine as well. But other things that you provide timely notice of your findings to the copyright owner, I don't think anyone's notified Nintendo they are doing this. And that is the really tricky thing. And basically, to limit your risk, you basically just need to talk to a lawyer and hope nobody notices. And that is the fundamentally difficult thing here. The EFF even talks about watching out for technological protection measures that control access to software as a whole to particular modules or functionality, in this case interoperability with a software emulator, and that's why Nintendo keeps using the language circumvent a technological measure. They think that the DMCA means that these emulators are violating the law and should not be permitted, but that has not been decided. It is an interpretation, and until it sees the inside of a courtroom, we will never know. but Nintendo is still looking at emulation. Sudachi is next. They say they're going to fight it, and hopefully if they watch this video, they will get rid of that one little page on their website that if Nintendo was to find would give them a lot worse time in court. Short of that, if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I'll do a video the next time Nintendo decides to do something interesting, but short of that, we're done, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.